Honourable Minister, thank you very much indeed for your time on Rwanda Beyond the Headlines.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We had a citizens outreach last Sunday. It's a tradition where the head of state, President Kagame, has a conversation with Rwandans in general. But there was nothing particularly traditional about this particular citizens outreach, because normally, for anyone who's gone through it or anyone who's familiar with it, it looks at domestic issues. It does touch on international issues where Rwanda is and so on, but this one looked primarily on where Rwanda is in relation to international issues and regional issues, and of course the conflict in the neighboring states of the DRC. And of course it was also indoors because of the weather. The president didn't want hundreds of thousands of people caught in the rain during the rainy season in Rwanda. So it was a citizens' outreach with a difference. As always, the explanation was clear, the position was laid out about Rwanda's position on the various claims that are being made with Europe, with the sanctions, with the Belgians, with the relations with the DRC and so on. So it was perfectly clear. But obviously some details came later with the severing of diplomatic relations with Belgium. And it is those that I'm hoping that you'll be able to expand on a little bit more. Now, for anybody who has an informed interest in Rwanda, there is, I don't know, one can call it a philosophy or even an ideology. Let's make friends. That is Rwanda's position. Even where there have been disagreements in the past, if those who are in a way offended or upset against Rwanda acknowledge the wrongs, Rwanda is keen to say, all right, let's make friends and start on a clean slate. So how is it that we get to this position where that hasn't happened with Belgium, when it had actually happened? I mean, there's been a lot of talk. I mean, when one looks at social media, there's a lot of talk about Belgium's position and Belgium's historical position with Rwanda and the region generally. But in a way, Rwanda had drawn a line with that and said, look, let's start afresh, let's start anew. So how is it that we now find ourselves where that hasn't happened when it normally does with Rwanda?
Thank you. For the past weeks and months, there was hostility, diplomatic hostility of Belgium against Rwanda. Belgium was mobilizing the whole, I would say, Western community, development partners of Rwanda, to take sanctions against our country. Be it the European Union, the United Nations, or even the World Bank. They were everywhere to mobilize against Rwanda. And as you said, when we have diplomatic relations with a country, it's because we have good relations, that we want to develop those relations, to develop a development cooperation for the benefits of our two peoples. But Belgium was had a negative attitude towards Rwanda. And actually it didn't start with the recent fights and the fall of Goma and other cities. Even before, when the European Union, through its European Peace Facility, was discussing the support to the Rwandan Defense Forces in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. It's Belgium that was holding back, that was blocking the decision. Eventually the decision was taken to support Rwandan Defense Forces, but it's always Belgium that was blocking. And even before that, you remember that our ambassador, Vincent Karega, who was proposed to represent us in Brussels, was rejected. He didn't receive the agreement on the instructions of Kinshasa. So we have so many months and years of hostility of Belgium that would eventually lead to this decision of severing our diplomatic relations.
Nonetheless, it's pretty dramatic, and it is a very serious step. You mentioned, I was going to get there a little bit later, but you mentioned Kinshasa, you mentioned the taking of Goma and Bukavu by M23. That is, of course, is the background to all of this. Two questions arise to anybody who is mentioning this. Belgium does this campaign, as you mentioned, to get Rwanda sanctioned by pretty much all of Europe. Why doesn't all of Europe? Rwanda has individual relationships with different countries in Europe. How do we find ourselves in a situation where one country can speak for Rwanda, for all of Europe, as it were, or manages to push all of Europe in a direction where it seems individual countries in the rest of Europe don't as well? We normally have perfectly cordial relations with Rwanda. Why should we do these sanctions? And then maybe a different conversation starts. How do we find ourselves in this situation?
First of all, they didn't fully succeed in that operation, because the sanctions they have wished or they pushed for were not taken by the World Bank or even by the European Union. But it's true that Belgium, it's one of the countries in the EU with, I think it's the country in the EU with a history with this region. You know, because it's a former colonial power of DRC and Rwanda and Burundi, and they have even a unit, a department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in charge of this region, and it's not the case for all EU member states. So there are many EU member states who are not interested in this region.
And they defer to Belgium.
Yes, and they defer to Belgium. But the problem is that from all countries in the world, I think Belgium should be the last to act so negatively against Rwanda because of its history and its responsibility in the history of this country and the history of this region. We are talking about the persecution of Congolese community, the Tutsi communities in Eastern DRC. You know that it's because of those artificial drawing of borders between different colonial powers, including Belgium, during the Brussels Conference of 1910. And there are also the forced immigration that was organized by Belgium of labor from Rwanda going to work on mining sites in Congo. And I can go on and go on with the responsibility of Belgium during the pogroms against the Tutsi in 1959 in the 60s, and even the responsibility during the genocide against the Tutsi here in this country, where they left the Tutsi of Etokitukiro in 2000 Tutsi were killed on 11th of April. So with this background, with what everything that Belgium has done to this country and this region, they should not be the country that is mobilizing against Rwanda. So, but they are doing it, they did it, and this is really unfortunate. This is why we have severed our relations.
Okay, let's look at that mobilization against Rwanda. There is something almost, I suppose, contradictory about this situation. In one sense, it's actually quite straightforward, and it isn't that complex at all. But one hears all these claims that it is a complex situation. I'm talking about the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo and how it affects relations between Rwanda and then, of course, now Belgium getting involved. In a way, the story is fairly straightforward, but there's so much detail, as you've just outlined, that goes back even to the 20th century, early 20th century, that it becomes deceptively complex. So I want to try, even if it's just 3 areas of it, but I want to try and outline this in this simplicity. Let's start with, you mentioned something interesting there. You said that the ambassador Vincent Karega was rejected by Belgium on the instructions of Kinshasa. So that is quite a thing to say. So how and why, in your view, is Belgium operating almost in the interest or almost on the instructions of Kinshasa.
They have, of course, economic interest in DRC, and there's that is not wrong in itself, having economic interest in another country, but that should not be used against the interest of another country, which is Rwanda. There is also the pressure of the Congolese community in Belgium, who are now organized, who are members of political parties in Belgium. And some of them are even in the leadership of those parties, even the party of the foreign minister. There are prominent Congolese figures. So they are driving the agenda, the anti-Rwanda agenda in those parties. And then we have even seen a motion or a resolution that was adopted by the Belgian parliament against Rwanda, which was actually calling for cutting everything against Rwanda. It's actually even unfortunate for a country like Belgium to be led or to be driven by the Congolese community in the political parties, because it's the situation now is that Belgium doesn't have any leverage in our region, and that they have fully supported a country which is DRC. So there is this issue that is really causing harm to the situation.
Let's look at why. So for somebody, I'm thinking from the perspective of somebody, a third party, who doesn't know the issues, who doesn't know the background. Let's look at why. Because it would seem strange to somebody. Belgium is acting in the interests, it's acting almost on the instruction of the DRC government against Rwanda. For somebody who doesn't know the issues and the perspective, it seems very strange. Let's look at why. We're 2 or 3 points on how we've got here. Why is Belgium doing this? And yes, there are those interests. What are those interests? You mentioned Goma and Bukavu. Where does this begin?
I think this is a good question to ask to the Belgian government, why they are doing that. I don't have full information. I know that they have interest in Congo, and then that they have a community that is Congolese community that is acting against Rwanda, and then they took this stance heavily against Rwanda and actually against a peaceful solution in our region. I think they should be able to explain why they are taking this anti-Rwanda stand that is even against their own interest of having a leverage in this region that used to be, I would say, their backyard in the past centuries.
Well, I mean, I'm hoping to be able to speak to them. We have tried, so yes. Maybe they will give us the time. But let me put to you the claims from your counterpart in Belgium, Mr. Maxime Prévost, who says, and I have the quote here exactly, but more or less that the severing of diplomatic relations is it's overreaction, and that it seems that when Rwanda and Belgium disagree, Rwanda prefers not to negotiate. Is this true? Did you refuse to negotiate? And in a way, when we started the discussion, I won't pretend to sit on the fence on this. I know that it does not sound like Rwanda to refuse to negotiate about anything. So I'm aware of that. But he claims that. So I want us to go back and see how you respond to his claim that you simply preferred to sever relations without negotiations.
But to negotiate with who? To negotiate with who? Do we need to negotiate with Belgium?
Presumably.
But we are not in conflict with Belgium. Actually, when we talk about political dialogue, it's in the region to end the conflict in Eastern DRC. We don't need to negotiate with anything with Belgium. Actually, what happened is that since this crisis started with the battle and the fall of Goma and all the cities that followed, it's true that we had a number of countries that threatened, pressured Rwanda in imposing sanctions, but I think all of them were, even by courtesy, calling me or calling the president to try to engage. Belgium didn't, and then they made all the Congolese leadership, even bragging about that. So I don't know when now they say that they wanted to negotiate. They negotiate what with Belgium? What we wanted from Belgium is that as a country with which we had diplomatic relations, that we had a cooperation, that they should, and that a country that has a history in this region, that they should be the first to understand and then to take a balanced position, which they didn't. They just had a one-sided position, a mobilization of all partners against Rwanda. So this is what they chose to do. And then I don't know what would Rwanda negotiate with Belgium.
All right, let me, again, as I said, let me not pretend we're sitting on the fence that I don't know what the issues are. So let me put them to you. The issues are that you mentioned the word territorial integrity. When those words are mentioned in this situation, it is almost tantamount to an accusation against Rwanda that it is involved in a conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let's talk a little bit, if we may, about that conflict and why it seems to be either deliberately or confused by some people. I mean, I would have thought the clarity of it, as I mentioned earlier, seems to me to be fairly obvious. But then we've got a European position, quote unquote, which is what Mr. Prévost suggests or claims. There's a European position that Rwanda must be, quote unquote, pressured into something. So, what I want to look at is what is happening in the DRC and where is the connection, where is that thread that Mr. Prévost would use to link to supposed pressure on Rwanda, which, if not all of Europe, but some of the Europeans seem to be following. Where are we?
First of all, you mentioned the territorial integrity. I believe that Belgium should not give any lesson to this region about territorial integrity, because colonization has nothing to do about respect of territorial integrity. That is first, and actually this is valid for the other European members. And then second, territorial integrity goes both ways. It's not a principle that was invented for the DRC alone. We have also issue of territorial integrity with this movement, the FDLR, that attacked Rwanda on several occasions, and also the FRDC that attacked on our territory. So we have been attacked, and we are under permanent threat over the past 30 years. So I think when the European Union or Belgium are hiding behind those principles, that cannot hold water, because those principles are universal principles that need to be respected everywhere. And even beyond the territorial integrity, what is the most important is even the physical integrity of people. We have in Eastern DRC permanent persecution of the Congolese Tutsi. North Kivu, the Banyamulenge in South Kivu, as we speak, the villages are being bombed by fighter jets and drones from the FRDC. Even the Hema in Ituri are being targeted. So this is also a principle of international human rights and humanitarian law. So those principles should be applied equally. In the statements of the EU, there is always this issue of human rights. And then we wonder if the human rights apply to some people, not to others. We wonder if in Eastern DRC there are human beings that are more equal than others. So this is really something that they should deal with that. But in any case, they should take a balanced position, position that is reflecting the situation on the ground in order to find a lasting solution.
So this is why I want to get to, it won't finish today, and we probably need to have several conversations on this. But I want to be able to get some clarification in all of this, because there is, I mentioned earlier, there is either a deliberate misunderstanding of the situation and its clarity, because it is perfectly clear, and it's the sources of conflict, or people, and there must be some, who are just simply ignorant of the issues. Now, so let's look at this question, these words, territorial integrity. It's become a cliche now that everybody uses. It's mentioned in the Rwanda processes, which is supposed to try to bring about peace here. It's mentioned in Europe now. It's mentioned constantly, and of course, it's mentioned by the Belgians. And it does come. The source of it is. I remember a few months ago that this phrase started in Congo. It started by the Congolese government. Now it's been taken by others. So let's look at the territorial integrity. You mentioned about, you made the point that everyone deserves territorial integrity. So let's look at the way in which Rwanda's territorial integrity has not been respected, and let's please have you respond to the accusation that you're not respecting Congo's territorial integrity. So we're clear about this.
For our territorial integrity, it was violated on several occasions since 1994. You remember in the 90s, there were changes in war and different incursions on our territory.
That's coming from Congo to attack Rwanda.
Yeah, exactly. And since 2018, I think we have almost 20 attacks on our territory, either physical attacks or shelling on our territory since 2018. And even during the Battle of Goma, we had shelling on our territory by the FRDC, who were at the airport of Goma, shelling on civilian homes, not on military targets in Rubavu district. More than 200 homes of civilians in Rubavu district were targeted. And don't take it from me, take it from the Chief of Defense Forces of South African National Defense Forces, who testified about it in a commission of the South African Parliament, that they were shelling on us, and then we are retaliating and putting the South African forces in danger. This is why they got into contact with us. So we were targeted on several occasions. You remember in 2022, they shelled on our territory also, trying to topple holding of Chogom. So our territorial integrity was violated. Actually, when Goma fell, there were an impressive arsenal that was found within a radius of 5 kilometers of our border, with very heavy weaponry, including long-range missiles and anti-aircraft missiles. Those were not aimed at the M23, because M23 was nearby on the battlefield. When you say long-range missiles, they were aimed at Rwanda, of course, and even anti-aircraft missiles are aimed at our forces, because the M23 doesn't have those military aircraft. So there was an impressive arsenal at our border, and there were, as you know, foreign forces that were deployed by President Tshisekedi, Burundian forces, Wazalendo militias, FDLR, some EDRs, even European mercenaries, to all of that to implement his obsession, which is to overthrow the government of Rwanda. And then he declared that publicly. He didn't hide. He said that he wanted to help the Rwandan youth overthrowing the government of Rwanda. He said also that he wanted to bomb Kigali without setting foot on the ground. So he was clear about that. So there is no one who can question about the fact that the territorial integrity of Rwanda was violated, and that we as a country were under existential threat from the DRC. This is why we put in place our defensive measures, which are military operations that are targeted, dynamic, proportionate to the threat, because there's no one else, like in '94, who will defend Rwanda than Rwanda themselves.
Now, I don't expect you to give me all the details tonight, but presumably the accusation of the impingement on the Congolese territorial integrity are as a result of Rwanda taking those defensive measures?
Yes, it's that. But they are confusing two things. They are confusing the M23 and the Rwanda. M23 is a Congolese movement defending a Congolese community of Rwandan culture, language, which was marginalized, persecuted, discriminated against. So it's the M23 that has taken over Goma. It's M23 that takes territory in Eastern DRC. It's M20, actually it's AFC/M23. It's that Congolese movement that is taking Congolese territories. Rwanda, our forces, we don't take territories in Eastern DRC. We have our defensive measures to deal with a threat, and then we have operations in our border area to deal with that threat. This is where the confusion is. Now, they even say M23/RDF. They have confused the two, which, of course, will lead to the unfortunate decisions or lack of comprehension of this crisis, because it's as if we deny the existence of the M23. Actually, this is what President Tshisekedi said, that this is an empty shell, that it's just the M23 don't exist, that it's just Rwanda Defense Forces. We put two or three Congolese in front of cameras to give the impression that they are Congolese while they are not. So we should separate the two. The M23, the Congolese movement, taking territories that have claims that they want talks to address the political grievances, and for us, we have a security concern that we address by our security measures.
You know the accusations by now, they've been repeated several times, that I don't know where the numbers come from. I think originally, I did read it, a UN group of experts that claimed that there were 3,000 to 4,000 Rwandan troops in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is now has been recycled several times. So once and for all, let's say you're talking about separating the issues, not conflating what M23 is doing and what Rwanda is doing in defensive measures. This claim of 3,000 to 4,000 troops, Rwandan troops in the DRC, is that conflation. They're suggesting that Rwanda is fighting with M23. Let's hear something on that.
This group of experts, we don't give any value to what the group of experts says. I've been personally dealing with a group of experts for the past decade. They have a mission, is to tarnish Rwanda whatever the cost. Because who can imagine that those, you know that the group of experts, there are 3-4 members, not more than 4 or 5 maybe. So they went to Eastern DRC to count 4,000 Rwandan troops. They know the figures by heart. So it's something that they have been doing. Even in the first war of the M23, 2012, 2013, they were having weird conclusions. I remember they came here to Rwanda, to the military cemetery. They said that they saw fresh graves. Then immediately concluding that those fresh graves are from Rwandan Defense Forces in Congo. Just because they saw fresh graves, as if Rwandan Defense members of the army don't die, so it's really a problem that they have. And on the contrary, what is happening in Eastern DRC, the persecution of the Congolese Tutsi, they don't report that, or barely report that. You saw the reporting yesterday by Bojana Koulibaly, who went to the Nturo village in Masisi territory, where from 2nd to 4th October,
this is a research,
yes, 300 homes of Congolese Tutsi were burned down by the Nyatura, the Wazalendo, and the FDLR. 300 homes. It barely, I think it was like a sentence in the report of the group of experts, because it is not interesting for them. They have a mission, is to tarnish Rwanda, to tarnish the M23, and everything that is important, that is happening, like the persecution of the Congolese Tutsi, they don't report or barely report that. So they have a mission, it's a politicized organization that should not be given so much attention.
Well, let me put this to you then. it's working. If their intention is to tarnish Rwanda, it is working to an extent. Because we now have a situation, I found it a little bit amusing earlier, but it is a serious issue in that they come up with these numbers. I'm puzzled as to where these numbers come from. They're being repeated now by serious people. And we have now this bizarre situation where there is, what is happening in Congo is almost, the detail of that is almost not reported at all or not acknowledged by anyone, with the exception that there is a humanitarian crisis, there is a conflict. And all the attention is on what Rwanda must do. Let's, quote unquote, put pressure on Rwanda. So their campaign, wherever it is working. So what does Rwanda do to say to the wider world? I mean, let's be specific about it. The UN Security Council, 5 permanent members, that they should be a little bit more equitable in how they look at this situation. How does Rwanda do that?
You know, the group of experts has this stamp of UN. When something comes from a UN, of a UN organ, it's as if it is the Bible, or that would be truth. But there are so many fake news that were put in the media by the group of experts, but also by MONUSCO. For example, when during the Battle of Goma.
This is the destabilizing, the stabilizing force, UN stabilizing force in the DRC.
Yes, the MONUSCO.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, it's the Ministry of Health of Congo that came up with a figure of 2,000, I think, of civilian victims. The next day, we had MONUSCO say that there were, I think, 3,000 corpses in Goma, giving the impression those are civilians. But that was actually a fake news by Kinshasa. And now you know that this figure is even now has rise to now 800,000 civilians. They did the same actually for the number of victims. They came from 5 million, now they are at 15 million. So it's just they are playing with the figures, humanitarian figures, just for a political purpose. So we should be careful with this kind of misinformation. And I understand that when you have the UN group of experts, the MONUSCO, even the UN Human Rights Council, that they issue those kind of figures or information, members of the UN Security Council take them. And then in the statements of the 15 members, you hear repeating the same figures without any kind of verification. That happened even for the Rubaya mine, where they say about, Bintu Keita, the head of MONUSCO, say that it's exploited by Rwanda, $300,000 of income every month. And then you have the same reporter going to Rubaya to really investigate and finding out that this is just an artisanal mining which is exploited by the population of Rubaya, which is almost 100% Rwandophone. So there is a problem in this UN system where, I don't know if it's out of laziness, of bad faith, or not investigating what is going on the ground and come up with accurate information. You read in the Libération, the French newspaper, where they went on the ground to ask questions to the humanitarian community in Goma. They were all really questioning this figure of 3,000.
I have been to Goma and to a small extent a bit of Bukavu, and I don't recognize the. I can't claim to have seen all of Goma or all of Bukavu, but it is, on the contrary, actually the place looks very peaceful. People are in the markets, and then you read what is coming out of very serious people. You talk about the European Union, the UNSC, that there is a terrible humanitarian situation. Again, I come back to this. Rwanda is a member of the United Nations, and you have conversations with individual countries in the European Union, and presumably you have conversations with European Union Commission. had we get to a situation where we have almost an invention of the facts and the actual facts on the ground are really nobody wants to look at them. How do we get to that situation?
Well, there must be a reason for that. I don't know if the same
And
interest.
what does Rwanda do? What can Rwanda do?
As I said, there must be a reason for that. The economic interest that we're talking about that makes those countries maybe behaving how they behave and not wanting to get the bottom of the situation, to get the facts, to get the truth. But Rwanda, of course, we have been engaging all members of the UN Security Council, members of the European Union, and they will continue to do so. But what is important is those members of the Security Council, especially the permanent members of the EU, also to act responsibly in this case, not to really take shortcuts for their interests, because the situation in Eastern DRC is a conflict that has been going on for too long, and that should be resolved in a political way, based on facts, based on what needs to be done to address the root causes of this conflict, meaning addressing the security concerns of Rwanda and also addressing the existential threat against the Congolese Rwandophone. So this is what those countries, those powerful countries, should be doing, instead of really taking those unilateral punitive measures that cannot help the situation.
You know this better than me, you know this better than most. Once the decisions have been taken by countries, by multilateral bodies like the UN, it becomes very, very difficult to reverse those situations. Now, in spite of everything you point out, everything you outline, and in spite of what I can say I have seen myself on the ground, the reality does not tally with what is claimed. Nonetheless, Rwanda now finds itself in a situation where very major important figures in the Rwandan military, for instance, are sanctioned by various countries on the basis of this either deliberate disinformation or misinformation or laziness, whichever it may be. So where again, I'm sorry to keep going on about this, what does Rwanda do? Where if people are not looking at the situation on the ground and coming to independent, objective conclusions, what does Rwanda do? What's next?
But those decisions are unilateral. They were taken by the European Union. But actually, I was in Brussels a few days ago, last week, if I'm not mistaken, to engage the European Union. But the sanctions they took, the individual sanctions, are unilateral sanctions. Not only that, they are not helping the situation, of course. They harm actually the peace process, but also they emboldened President Tshisekedi, who believed that he's supported by the European Union. But for us, those sanctions that they took 2 days ago, they are irrelevant, and we don't give them too much value. And we tell the European Union that whatever sanctions or punitive measures they take, we will continue defending our territory and working for a peaceful solution to this crisis.
Okay, so we talked about the conflation of Rwanda's defensive measures and the conflict in the DRC, which you say is an inter-Congolese conflict and should be looked at differently from Rwanda's defensive measures. One of the statements made by the Belgian foreign minister to emphasize that conflation of these two is that the recent decision by AFC M23 not to continue with meetings in the Rwanda process with the Congolese side had somehow something to do with the sanctions on Rwanda. So there is this attempt to say that Rwanda is involved with M23, and what M23 does is detected by what is done to Rwanda or against Rwanda. What do you say to that?
This is what I
Called European problems to African solutions, because we say that we want in Africa African solutions to African problems. Then what we get from Europe is European problems to African solutions. How is it possible that the European Union took individual sanctions against the M23 just at the eve of this Rwanda meeting that was convened between the government of the DRC and M23 to have a political dialogue? How did they do that at the eve of this meeting? So I think the European Union should tell us what they want. They cannot tell us that they support the Africa-led processes, but then they take individual sanctions against one party as if they don't want these African-led processes to succeed. You cannot, if they want to support us, to support those EAC SADC process, they should support also the content of it, the content of this process. And nowhere in the document we have been considering or signing under the EAC SADC process, the sanctions are mentioned. Nowhere. It's not in the process that we are dealing with. But if they come up with those unilateral sanctions against one party, they are actually undermining the very process they claim to support. So it's a problem that they need to understand. So either they support genuinely this process, or they give us peace, so that we Africans can deal with this process without this constant interference of the European Union and other members of the international community.
We cannot finish this discussion without talking about the current meeting between President Tshisekedi and President Kagame in Qatar. We know that President Tshisekedi had declared that he would never meet President Kagame. He's now doing that. Now, Rwanda has consistently made its position clear that there has to be an acknowledgement that this conflict is an inter-Congolese conflict, and there's really no point in any discussions that are not based on that acknowledgement. And there are also no point in any discussion that are not based on the acknowledgement that the FDLR, which is the former perpetrators and planners of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, who are now in Congo, are a threat against which Rwanda has to defend itself. Those two things are, it would seem to me, correct me if I'm wrong here, a red line for Rwanda. If the Congolese don't seem ready to accept that, and that, as you mentioned earlier, they're being emboldened by the wider world in refusing to look at that, on what will these discussions be based?
First of all, this meeting between President Tshisekedi and President Kagame in Doha is a meeting in the framework of confidence-building measures between the two heads of state. But as you would read in the statement issued by the Qatar Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the two heads of state reaffirmed their support to the African-led processes, the EAC and SADC processes, including the ceasefire. So it's not a new process or a parallel process that was created. It's just to a confidence-building measure to between the two heads of state that could facilitate the implementation of the process that we are dealing with in the continent. And you would remember that the Rwanda process is also an interstate process between Rwanda and DRC, because our relations were deteriorated following the conflict in eastern DRC. So in the political dialogue that will start in the framework of the EAC SADC process, there will of course be dialogue between the M23 and the government of DRC, but also the continuation of the dialogue between Rwanda and DRC to talk about our security concerns that needs to be addressed. And as Rwanda, we have said on several occasions that we want long-term security guarantees at our border. So it's a meeting that was important, and it was also important that both leaders underscored the need to support our African-led processes. And you know that even for us, for Rwanda, we also underscored the need for this dialogue between the FCM23 and the government, and also the need to implement, to neutralize the FDLR, because it's actually what was agreed during one of the ministerial meetings under the Rwanda process, the concept of operations to neutralize this force. Yes.
I'm aware that your time is limited, so let me look at how I can end on a couple of points, and maybe we'll ask if we can come back again when we have a little bit more time. The first I want to look at, I'm going to go back to the Belgian severing of diplomatic relations and go back where I started, which is from Rwanda's perspective. The approach is let's make friends. So there was a lot that Rwanda had decided not to look at. Everything from the way Belgium behaved prior to 1994, of course, to lead up to 1994 and the genocide against the Tutsi. In the aftermath, in the trial of various individuals who fled to Belgium, in the encouragement of various groups now in Belgium who should be tried under genocide denial from your point of view. Rwanda was, in a way, taking a diplomatic way of discussing that slowly. Now, all of that has come to the fore. You yourself have mentioned it on Twitter and other places. So, what would Rwanda expect? What would Rwanda ask Belgium to do? Let's put it that way, a little bit more diplomatically, for relations to go where you can begin to build better trust, better relations.
This is not the priority for the moment, because you are engaged in a peace process in the region. This should be our priority, but of course it's not the first time that two countries sever diplomatic relations. I think at some point in history those relations are restored, and then for that it will be important to really address the issues that made the relations being severed in the first place. Because when we have diplomatic relations with a country, it's because there is trust. You want to build good bilateral relations, you want to have a cooperation, you want to have people-to-people exchange. If we have a country that is acting constantly negatively with hostility against Rwanda, you would understand that to restore those relations, we would need to address those issues. First, to have a more balanced approach by Belgium vis-à-vis Rwanda and vis-à-vis our region. So we don't have any specific demand for now because it's not a priority, but we believe that for the future, to restore our relations, we'll need really serious work on how we got into this in the first place. And you know the reason, it's this hostility of Belgium that will have to be reviewed by Brussels itself.
Now let's look at the region. We'll end on this, if you may. Let's look at the region. In some ways, from a third party's point of view, it's not been very impressive. I mean, we've been hearing more from the European Union, from the West generally, than we've been hearing from the region. There is SADC, there is the East African Community, there's ISGLRR, which is supported the African Union. They're virtually whispering when the Western nations are shouting. I mean, we've got a situation where those who own the problems, or rather who should own the problems, seem to be deferring to those in the West. Now, maybe I'm being somewhat crude and diplomatic about this, but it does seem to me, as somebody who observes this, that the Rwanda process, for instance, seems to be a dead letter. A little while ago, the mediator in Angola began to repeat the echoing what Kinshasa was saying, these words again, territorial integrity of the DRC. Now, it seems to me that when the mediator begins to echo one of the parts of the conflict, they're no longer terribly effective. So there is that. And then there is the fact that South Africa, one of the major nations in Southern Africa, sends troops to go and fight alongside a coalition of a motley crew that includes mercenaries, that includes the FDLR, that includes the FARDC, in the name of bringing about peace in the DRC, but actually doing the opposite. So you've got, there is confusion within the region. At least there seems to be confusion within the region. In the last meeting between the ESC and SADC, they seem to have a clear communique, and there seems to be some kind of hope that a new approach may be taken. Where is that new approach? We don't seem to see it now. They're still whispering while the West is shouting.
But this is the problem. The problem is that there is noise from Europe and North America around the sanctions, around the summoning of Rwandan ambassadors. So they are just taking those measures and they communicate about them, and then so that the media publish them, forgetting about the conflict, the regional process itself. And we have been actually engaging since 8th of February in a positive process. After the Dar es Salaam summit of 8th February, there were several meetings, including meetings of Chief of Defense Staff, Chief of Defense Forces, and the ministerial meeting held 2 days ago. But of course, there was not enough communication around that compared to the communication that was made about the meeting in Brussels. Maybe it's also our responsibility and your responsibility as journalists also to focus on positive development in our region and forget or not amplify, I would say, the measures or punitive measures that are taken by European countries which are against the current peace process we are trying to pursue. So it's actually one of the reason that show that these sanctions, these punitive measures, are counterproductive and they are harmful because they are now divert the attention on something that is actually not productive instead of focusing the attention on a solution that is being worked on by leaders of the region. So we have now a positive process, and we hope that now the whole attention will focus on that to have a perspective of a way out to this crisis.
Okay, let's end on this. And as a journalist, look, I'll tell you what I find fairly frustrating. As I say, without sitting on the fence here, I know quite a bit about this story, about the issues. And the issues seem to be perfectly clear to me. But in general, for instance, now the story is going to be about the sanctions. Now the story is going to be the secessional rift between Belgium and Rwanda. And the basic facts get lost in all of that. So what I would ask from you, I suppose, is to speak to us and say, look, this situation is huge and it is profound and it is broad, but it is not complex. It's relatively simple. So this is, in order for it to be understood and in order for it to be properly resolved, we need to look at 1, 2, 3. What would you say? Say 3 things that we as journalists need to look at to get at the truth. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to report the exact factors they are that lead to the situation as it is. So lead us to that, out of what has become a sort of, really noise that people just simply follow where the sensationalist stories are.
I think it's you need just to read the outcome of all meetings, summits and meetings that under this process, joint EAC process, we had this summit in Dar es Salaam, the meetings of Chief of Defense Staff, and then the meeting of ministers. And the outcome is clear. First, we all agree on the cessation of hostilities and the ceasefire. We are also working on a force, a hybrid force, EAC SADC force, to monitor this ceasefire, and also a verification mechanism of the two communities. And also the meeting talked about humanitarian access, how to facilitate the access for humanitarian aid to the population in need. So there is all those issues related to ceasefire, cessation of hostility, and humanitarian access. And then there was the Rwanda process, which was merged with the Nairobi process, with the appointment of facilitators. 3 facilitators were appointed for now. Now in Harare, we talked about adding a 4th facilitator in order to ensure the representation of SADC and representation of gender representation and inclusivity. So with the 3 facilitators, under the authority of the AU chairperson, who is President Lourenço of Angola, so they will work together to launch, to kick off the political talks between all stakeholders. So this is really the roadmap that we have. There are the immediate measures that were taken related to ceasefire and cessation of hostilities and humanitarian access, but there is also the medium and long-term issues or measures related to a political dialogue that will lead to a settlement of this crisis, a political settlement of this crisis, and then with the hope of bringing lasting solution to the crisis in Eastern DRC.
So let me definitely end on this. You see, all of that sounds really clear and really convincing and really important. But it's almost, I can tell you personally, that it went out of my mind a long time ago because we don't hear it. We simply hear the noise from Europe. Now, 2 ways here. We can, of course, hold Europe responsible for not looking at the detail properly and asking what the real facts are. But should we not also say to the region, why on earth are you whispering about your own issues when others are shouting what isn't true to the issues on the ground? That's the first thing. And the last thing is this. We know that I've said on several occasions that I'm not going to sit on the fence on this to pretend that I don't know the fact that I do know. We do know that the government in the DRC is not going to adhere to all of these agreements. They never have done, and they're not going to do that. The only way, it seems to me, that they would be obliged to do that is if the region insists upon it. But we're not hearing from the region. We're just simply hearing from Belgium, from the European Union, from the others. So what on earth is going on with the regional leaders, and what on earth is going on with the African Union?
To be fair, we are communicating about it. The meeting of Harare, there was communication, official communication by the EAC SADC Secretariat, by different participants, including myself, the Minister of Kenya. we communicated about that. Maybe the question is if there is interest actually by those European media that shape the narrative around the world to take interest in that process, because I know those BBC, CNN, France 24. It seems that everything happening in Africa must be bad to worth reporting. So, but we have been reporting. Actually, African media have been reporting about that. But we feel that there is interest, little interest from the I would say Western media in general. But in any case, if we continue on that path, if we continue having positive results, they will have to pick interest into our processes. And as for DRC, if they are not going to respect or to implement the decision or not, we will see. We know by experience that they have been reluctant to implement all agreements that were signed in the past because of their lack of good faith and political will.
It's why we are where we are now.
This is why we are here now. Yeah. So and then we will see now if there will be pressure enough from our region, but also from outside Africa, because they like putting pressure on everybody except Congo. So maybe it's time for them to understand it's important to put pressure on them in order to be sure that they implement their agreements.
Honourable Minister, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much.
Thank
Indeed,
you.
maybe you can keep us informed on the developments of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you.